Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm welcoming a brand new guest, Coach Laura Savino, to talk about muscle building phases for women. Thank you very much, Laura, for coming on the show today.
Oh yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. I've enjoyed listening to your other episodes, and I look forward to connecting with you and your audience.
And I'm so appreciative that you listened to it beforehand too. You did your homework. And in order to break the ice, I'm going to ask you the question that I always start a podcast with when interviewing a new guest. And that is, who are you? What do you do? And why are you so awesome at it?
My name is Laura. I run a nutrition coaching company. We do both group coaching and one-on-one, as well called Elevated Pursuit Nutrition. And I also do group programming called The Practical Athlete. So that's what I do. But before I got into the nutrition fitness space, I was a packaging engineer. And so my entire approach is coming from that kind of data and problem solving side. So when we talk about the rest of this episode, we're going to be talking about a lot in terms of like tracking the data, what makes sense. And that's why I think my approach is a little bit more unique in the space, is because I really take that data-driven approach, but I don't only rely on the data, because at this point, we've both coached probably hundreds of combined clients at this point, and you understand that there's a massive human element when it comes to coaching. And so that's why I'd say, hey, the best part about this is I combine the engineering side with that human approach side.
I find that so interesting because I don't have an engineering background, but I am very much data driven. And as you say, I find the coaching space fascinating because you're marrying that unemotional, objective, data-driven approach with an understanding and empathy with the human element, because in the end, we're coaching people, we're not coaching robots. And in fact, today, we're here to discuss how to coach women through a muscle building phase. And the first question I want to ask you is, why are we talking about women specifically? Because somebody may be listening and wondering, well, what's the difference between men and women? Why do we even need to make that distinction? And I wouldn't want them to take away from this something that is inaccurate, because there are a lot of myths around how women versus men should or should not train and eat.
Mm-hmm. So what's funny is that when we look across the spectrum, a lot of the data actually has the same rates of gain for men and women, but it's a percentage of where you start. So relatively speaking, how I coach a man through a build versus a woman through build is very similar, but the psychology of it is probably is apples and oranges or carrots and zucchini, because the approach coming from the emotional side in the background is very, very different. Especially when I think most women have come from a background of always chasing being smaller. And yes, they're like, my goal body looks like this, but they don't realize a lot of that requires muscle. And so when we think about it from that perspective, it's actually not that different from a data perspective. Like, regardless of where you are on the gender spectrum, assuming you are not enhanced in one way, your rates of gain are going to be relatively similar to your training age and your current body weight. But however, how we might coach a woman through this process versus a man ends up being completely different when you talk about approaching them as like a coach to a client.
Yeah, I'm glad we discussed this first and foremost, because when somebody's listening, given that I coach a variety of people all over the gender spectrum, from including gender diverse people, I will title the podcast something along the lines of muscle building phases for women for algorithm related purposes. But I wouldn't want this to alienate people who don't identify as cis women and yet have a body that was assigned female at birth, or somebody who does identify as a woman but has a body assigned male at birth. So it's very important for me to begin by establishing that the differences we'll be looking at are not really physiological per se, they're more so psychological and background based, because how we approach training and nutrition comes from how we were brought up, the kind of environment we lived in, the people we were surrounded by, the habits that were instilled into us, and the ideals relative to what our body should, in quotation marks, look like, that we were brought up with as well. So thank you for clarifying that, Laura. So now, when we're talking about muscle building phases, there are lots of terms: building, massing, bulking, muscle building. What is your personal favorite with this kind of population, and why?
So I've actually gone back and forth on this, and as you've seen through some of my content, I waffle back and forth between muscle building and bulking. So I've thought about going, do I just kind of lean into like, oh, it's a muscle building phase or a lean building phase from a marketing perspective? And I'm like, you know what? It's bulking. Like it is. Whether you want to, polish it a little bit differently or give it a little different nomenclature. And so I typically just go between bulk and muscle building. Because at the end of the day, is my goal to help you feel better about what you're doing, or is it to desensitize you from the common nomenclature? And so I really just go between muscle building and bulking kind of interchangeably because of that. Because like, okay, if we know that the common nomenclature out there is bulking, yeah, we are doing a bulk. It's not going to be a dreamer bulk, but we are going to do it in a targeted phase. And so that's why I just flip flop back and forth between those two, because at the end of the day, our goal is, instead of going, oh, we're going to name it something different so that you feel better about it, we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off and go, hey, we're approaching a muscle building phase with strategy, with intent, with specific goals. And it's going to be different than your preconceived notions of what you think a bulk is.
I appreciate that perspective because it makes for easier communication, so that when the client sees bulking phases discussed online, they understand this is what's happening. But then also, it implies a trust in the process and in the coach, because as you say, if people don't like that term, it's because of preconceived notions. And hopefully, with this podcast today, we're going to demystify this bulking process so that those preconceived notions will likely be taken care of. Now, my next question is, who is a good candidate for a muscle building or bulking phase? Some might be very obvious, but others I don't think are that obvious.
So I think if we go with the prerequisite of, if you are following a strategic hypertrophy progressive overload program, everybody is a candidate at least once in their life. Okay. Regardless of if your goals, if your long-term goal is like, I actually don't want to build any muscle, I still want you to go through a muscle building phase once. And the reason why is because when we go through that muscle building phase, you learn a lot about yourself. If like, hey, we're only going to gain, we're going to set a short rate of gain goal, but I want you to learn about yourself. I want you to learn what it's like to actually eat enough food, because especially, in the context of this podcast being mostly for women, and we go with that Y2K mindset. Is what my clients call it. Like, oh, I grew up in the early 2000s, and that was the heroin chic, heroin chic look. They often come with a history of going, have never actually truly eaten enough in my life consistently. And so even if their goals, when they come to me like, hey, I don't want to gain any weight, I don't want to gain any muscle, I'm like, cool, but we're going to do it. It might not be in the first 3 months, it might not be in the first 6 months, but at some point, like, we need to go through this phase once, as long as we have that training program and the understanding of training to failure to go along with it. I think everybody should do it at least once. If you are a person who's like, I'm never going to do a strategic hypertrophy program, I don't have any of those goals, and I'm like, okay, we just don't have, there's no reason for us to go into a muscle building phase if we don't have the training application to go along with it, in order to make sure that when we are in muscle building phase and a surplus, that we are actually building muscle and not just gaining body fat.
That makes sense. It's a very interesting perspective. I think to give people further insight, using an example might be helpful. So I've noticed from your content that you've done a building phase yourself lately, and you're also somebody who doesn't purely train for hypertrophy. You're more of a, maybe, I don't know if you resonate, if hybrid athlete is a term that resonates with you. You can correct me if that's wrong. So I was wondering, what was your goal with that specific bulking phase?
Yeah, so kind of two-pronged. This is my fifth season building, and so just give y'all a little bit of background. I pretty much have the same nutrition periodization every year. I live in Colorado, in the United States, and so we have just incredible summers and winters here. In the summer, I love to hike. That's probably my 1A of getting outside with my two dogs and climbing up mountains. And then in the winter, I love to snowboard. So when those things are in play, you have to balance, like as you said. I'm not sure I quite bridge the hybrid athlete maybe in the summers, but in when we look at the summer, if my 1A is climbing up mountains, I don't necessarily have the recovery capacity to be committed to a training program that's geared towards hypertrophy for as much as you need to build muscle. So my summers are pretty much spent in performance maintenance, where I'll lift 2 to 3 days a week, and then I'll be hiking 2 days a week. And then as we transition into fall, it's like, okay, well, I'm probably lost a little bit of mass because I was doing all this endurance over the summer. My goal is obviously to retain that, but if I had one less leg day a week, I may have lost a little bit. So the winter phases, so like right now for us, usually Labor Day, so September to January, February, I do a build every single year. And then a spring fat loss phase, because this spring is kind of the worst time of the year here because it's still kind of snowy and wet, but it's not enough snow to go snowboarding and it's still too wet to go hiking. So it's a great time to be in the fat loss phase to kind of shave off anything that happened in the build. So that's kind of my personal approach here is I spend 4 to 6 months in a build every single winter, which pairs a little bit better with that snowboarding because snowboarding is not quite as much of an endurance sport. It's almost like doing a little bit of HIIT or sort of HIIT, sort of a little bit of zone 5 work in there. And if I think about my overarching goals and why I choose that way, it's like, one, I want to enjoy the outside, especially with my dogs, especially living here. And two, I enjoy looking muscular and lean. And so if I approach each of those goals with seasonality, you can have it. You can have it all, just not all at the same time. So in the spring, sweet. I look lean. It's great. Good for a good early May photo shoot. And then I just go eat my face off all summer, hiking mountains. And then I eat my face off all winter, doing the muscle building phase. And then we, repeat the cycle.
Thank you for explaining. And just to give people perspective on why you might need a bulking phase, even if you don't want to be a bodybuilder and you don't want to build massive amounts of muscle. For example, in your case, how does having more muscle play into the other goals that you have? Obviously, it plays into looking lean and muscular. What about your sporting activities?
Yes. Oh, for certain. I actually had my first snowboarding day of the season this past like 2 weeks ago. And one of the things, I've been snowboarding for I've been skiing or snowboarding for about 26 years plus at this point, maybe 28. And every season it gets easier. Like I go in the first day, I'm like, oh, I can easily crush 4 hours straight the first day of the season. Why is that? Because I spent the entire off season I'm doing strength training, doing some unilateral work, so single leg, single arm, a lot of core work. So every year I go, oh, it's a little bit easier because I've come in with that much more muscle mass every season. And when you have that amount of muscle mass, your ability to do all the other things in life is so much easier. Some other tangentials here is like my husband and I have been renovating our house for the last 3 years. And he's a big 6 foot tall ex-hockey player, and I can hang with him when we're moving, concrete bags around, when we're doing those things. Like I want to be strong enough to do all those outside activities you wouldn't necessarily think are like strength activities, but they are life things. Like if I'm walking my two dogs, they're 180 pounds a piece. I have no issue if they see a little baby bunny rabbit and like, oh, nope, we're not chasing that. But having that strength out to live life outside the gym, to be able to, carry over to hiking and climbing mountains, and so having strong glutes and strong quads and strong hamstrings, strong stability muscles, those are all in part. So like the strength training, while it's great for adding muscle, it also helps you live life so much easier. You have a lot less barrier to entry of like, oh, okay, are they out of shopping carts at the grocery store? No buggies. Like I will just carry my 6 bags to my car. Like farmer's walks, it's just a different version of it, slightly less weighted evenly. And the biggest part about having muscle is like, okay, I can live life a lot easier. I can do the things I want to do a lot easier when I have more muscle.
I'm so glad you brought up everyday life because I was going to make that connection myself, since sporting activities are way more demanding than everyday life. If muscle makes you better at sporting activities, just imagine how much better it makes you at everyday life. And something that is also worth thinking about is that the longer we live, the harder everyday life becomes. The more muscle you have, the easier everyday life becomes when you're older. And we also need to appreciate the fact that as we get older, we start losing muscle mass. So the more you can build and continue to build as you age, the lower your risk for osteoporosis, which is bone mineral density loss, the lower your risk for fractures, and hip fracture is a leading cause of death purely because people fall and they don't have the muscle mass to cushion that fall and prevent it from spiraling into something worse. So muscle mass has a lot of value that may be underappreciated if people are only focusing on their physique. However, it does also change your physique. And something that I find is that women often focus way more on fat loss as opposed to muscle gain because what they really want is definition. They may be attracted to the idea of a flatter and defined stomach, for example, or definition in their legs. And they think that the key to that is to lose the body fat that covers those body parts. Now, maybe, Laura, you might challenge that by if you agree with what my thinking is, but I'll give you the floor and you can tell me, do you think that sometimes a bulking phase may be the answer to wanting to look leaner as opposed to going into a deficit?
100%. I will tell you that every single one of my clients talk about what's going on in your calendar year. And so I'm gonna weave back to this. But when you think about, I just told you about my annual periodization. So there's only, if there are 52 weeks in the year, you cannot spend 52 weeks in a fat loss phase. Eventually, you're going to have metabolic adaptations. You're not going to be able to dig any deeper or not have the will to dig any deeper in a calorie deficit to continue losing fat. So let's just hypothetically cap that at 16 to 20 weeks per year in fat loss. What are you doing the rest of the year? You have 32 weeks left. And my goal with pretty much everybody is like, okay, well, we have 32 weeks left in the year. How do you want to spend that? Would it actually take you closer to that goal if we go into a muscle building phase? You build up, you rebuild up your maintenance a little bit. And if we put on some muscle, I bet you that fat loss phase, the second one we do in the spring, you might lose, 8 to 10 pounds, but the visual is going to look like you lost 20. And that's the thing. When we finally get to that point where you've agreed to do a muscle building phase with me, I have probably heard 40 plus times going, I thought I had 50 pounds to lose. I gained 5 pounds in a muscle building phase and then I lost 8 pounds. And now I actually had 15 pounds to lose. I just was chasing this fat loss goal over and over and over again, thinking that all I had to do was show my muscle, but no, I had to build some muscle. And so, especially in that first muscle building phase, we tend to see a lot of women have pretty significant recomp. I don't sell that, I don't promise that, but it does happen pretty significantly where you go, oh, for the first time you ate enough, you went into a muscle building phase and you gained 5 pounds. But if we were to have done a DEXA scan, it might look like you gained 8 pounds of muscle and lost 3 pounds of body fat. And then you follow that with a fat loss phase and go, oh, one, the fat loss phase is a lot easier. Two, it looks visually like the photos of just fat loss to fat loss versus muscle build to fat loss is night and day from a progress perspective. And so once you see the light going, oh, wow, if I periodize nutrition, I'm always making progress towards that goal that I have of having that definition and leanness, but I know that I can't chase fat loss 52 weeks a year. So if I have 32 weeks left in the year, maybe I'll put in a 12 to 16 week muscle building phase. I know I'm going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's actually taking me closer to my goals faster than if I only chase fat loss and maintenance.
And when you take that approach, how I wonder if you take it irrespective of the client's starting body fat levels, or if you change that approach if somebody has a considerable amount of excess fat to lose. For example, according to the BMI scale, which may be problematic, but can be helpful, at least in this particular case, to give people an idea. If, according to this scale, the person starts as obese or on the higher end of the overweight spectrum.
So if let's go, let's go with obese. Okay, so higher end of overweight spectrum, we're probably still doing a build. If we are getting close to the obese category, and I want to clarify or add some context here with, let's say we're in the obese category, but our food is now in a really good spot. Our training is in a good spot. All of our lifestyle habits are in line. Because usually when we start making those changes, like it's hard to actually hold on to body weight once we've made some of those big, big changes in life, assuming we don't have any other outlying hormonal factors or something else going on. So in the kind of obese category or pretty far overweight, instead of going through a true 16-week surplus, again, we're still holding to that, like, okay, 20 weeks a year fat loss phase. What I will have them do is build up to the top of maintenance and then do a surplus for about 4 weeks, just to confirm that we've hit that top of maintenance range. So, for example, if you were coming to me and you were severely overweight and you've been eating 2,500 calories, and I'm like, okay, well, it's about to be, I'll give a current client example. We're sitting at like close to 300 pounds. And I'm like, cool, you're at 2,500 calories at 300 pounds. We probably have some headway. And it's, at this point, it was right before Thanksgiving, US Thanksgiving, which is in November. And we have Christmas right fast fall. Like it's just a terrible time to start a fat loss phase right now. This time of year, I was like, great, here's what we're going to do. I want to increase calories until we actually start gaining, so we know what that top of maintenance is. This client's now eating 3,000 calories a day, still not gaining weight. Okay, so now we get to sit at 3,000 for the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then early February we're going to start a fat loss phase. And eventually, my goal is to actually have them push to maybe 31, 3,200, where they start gaining. But okay, we know that the top end is now 3,100. We're just going to sit here, let those adaptations happen, where we're sitting at the top end of maintenance. And that's going to make the first 2 months of adherence to the fat loss phase so much easier when you've actually fueled yourself. And now, sitting at 3,100 calories, this client's actually losing inches because they've been adapted down to those low 25, 2,400 for so long. So they're having a little bit of recomp sitting at the top end of maintenance. And then we're not really going to push further than that. And then when we start our fat loss phase in February, it's just going to be so much easier for them. And so when we are looking at that kind of, okay, we have significant, let's call it 70 plus pounds to lose, then we go, okay, we're going to spend that, we're going to brush a surplus. We might hang at maintenance plus, and then we're going to pull back down for the deficit time frame. So those are clients where we're in a health situation where it doesn't necessarily make sense to increase pounds on the scale, but can we probably see some pretty significant muscle gains in high end of maintenance when your calories are that high and your training is in a good place and we've made significant lifestyle change? Yes. It just might not be worth it to chase the full amount of gains on the table going into a surplus. So we're going to go, hey, we'll get 60% of what we could get in a build at that top end of maintenance. And then we will use those off seasons to build up as much muscle mass as we can, just maybe at the most aggressive amount possible.
I'm going to rephrase what I think you said so that, one, I make sure that I understood it correctly, but two, I'm going to contextualize certain things you said for my audience that might not be familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say top end of maintenance, my understanding is that you are thinking, as I would, that somebody doesn't have a single number of calories that they maintain their body weight at, but rather a range. So there's a lower end of the range and a top end of the range. And typically people who have obesity and they're interested in coaching, they're usually interested in losing body fat. So they might have already tried to lose body fat, and that's why they're sitting on the lower end of maintenance, because they're trying to lose body fat, but for some reason, they're not able to do it on their own. They're already trying to eat less, but they don't really know how to approach physique changes the way a coach would, and that's when they come to you. So at this point, they're not eating very well, they're not eating enough nutrients, but they might still not be seeing fat loss because they're not really in a deficit. They're just sitting at this bottom end of their maintenance range. So you build them up to the top end, meaning they're still not going to see major fat loss, But what they may see is body recomposition, because if they're new to resistance training or new to resistance training in the way that you coach it, where it's more precise, it's it's with the right intensity of effort, with the right volume and the right form to build muscle, what they will see is that they may still build muscle without being a surplus, while also undergoing body recomposition, so they'll lose body fat at the same time. So we're not really seeing a major loss. There might be some, but we're not seeing any gain. However, inches are being lost, as you said, and their physique is also changing. Would that be a somewhat accurate rephrasing of what I think you said?
Yes, that would be an accurate rephrasing. The one thing that I'll kind of add for additional context here is we know maintenance is a range. So that let's go, for example, this current client, their maintenance range is maybe 2,800 or 2,700 to 3,000. We go, okay, well, then why wasn't she losing it 2,500? Because that's the usual follow up question. And when you are in a deficit for a long time, you eventually adapt down to those lower calories because your body's like, okay, hey, we can't lose indefinitely at a perfect rate of loss for forever. We need to slow this down. Danger, danger. Maybe we move a little bit less. Maybe we bring down some of those that NEAT. And what that might look like, and the example I normally give my clients is, here, I fold laundry when I'm watching football or whatever ice hockey is on at night. So that laundry basket sits next to my coffee table in front of the TV. And in a surplus or at maintenance, you're like, okay, cool. I'll just fold it when it shows up. And you fold it, you move, you do the things. But in a deficit, you just have a little bit less want to do those things. So in a deficit, you might just let that laundry pile up to your out of clean socks. That doesn't necessarily translate to steps. That doesn't translate to any sort of like trackable metric, but that just energy that you're expending dampens because you've been in a deficit or consistent low days for a long period of time. So she had gone through, trying to do deficit, constantly trying to keep her calories lower, and she had adapted down to 2,500 because she's no longer doing some of those extraneous movements that you do when you have enough calories to use. And so that's where you go, okay, when we bring calories back up, you start moving again. Again, not necessarily quantified as steps. Maybe that's like an extra wipe down on the counter after you make dinner. And so when we went back up to 3,000, your body's like, oh, hey, we have enough energy to spend. I'm not worried about where my next calorie is coming from or when it's coming. Your body's a lot more open to some of those recomp things when you actually eat at maintenance, especially at the top end of maintenance, than if you're sitting down at this kind of adapted after spending time eating low calorie.
I also find that aside from metabolic adaptation, there's also a behavioral component whereby when you really want to lose body fat, you may take the approach where the fewer calories you eat, the better. So some people slash calories to a point that's unsustainable for them. And what happens is they stick to it perfectly, maybe for a few weeks, and they see fat loss, and then it stops, even though they are technically on the same calories because it's so unsustainable. They're not trying to cheat their diet, they're still doing their best, but they simply don't have the bandwidth to track everything they're eating as accurately as they were doing before. And since the calories are so low, there's a very small margin for error. In addition to that, they're very hungry because they are unsustainably low. So what happens is that they don't under track, they over track. So they think that they are eating 1,200 calories, where in fact they're probably eating 800, 1,800, 2,000, and basically they're taking themselves out of a deficit. So in addition to the metabolic adaptation, which is physiological, there's also a psychological component to take into account.
Absolutely. Yes. There's a whole lot of psychology in that place. And the other thing that I always find interesting that kind of comes along with that over tracking piece is there's definitely a certain demographic where they are like, okay, I have to guesstimate eating out. And then every time they guesstimate, so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to a restaurant and I'm going to track, this is 6 ounces of chicken and 6 ounces of potato. And then they're like, and it was 4 tablespoons of butter. And I go, are we sure? Like, was your plate swimming in butter? But they're like, well, I have to make sure I account for the oil. And I'm like, okay, yes, but 4 tablespoons, that's 500 calories. Like, what was there like a moat around your potatoes? Like, was everything glistening? Was it wet and dripping? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, okay, well then, like, you're actually shortchanging yourself. And then you ask me the next day, like, oh, I was at home and I just was ravenous and snacking, like because you over tracked, because you're so afraid of going over that you're going to overtrack and you put yourself into an even further deficit. And then you have the boomerang or rebound effect the next day of just hunger cues through the roof because you've even further dug yourself into a hole. And my question back to you is like, well, if you're really confident about estimating at home, why are you being bullish or scared when you're out? Like, if you have really great skills, then apply them when you're out too. Like, we don't change the lens that we look through when we're tracking at home versus when we're tracking out. Just go, okay, well, I think this is about what it is. We move on.
That's an excellent point. Well said. And now we're about half an hour in. And I think at this point, let's imagine that I'm listening to this and thinking, oh, these two people are speaking a lot of sense. I'm convinced I want to try a bulking phase, but I'm still a little bit afraid of some things. So, Laura, in your experience, what are some common preconceived notions and fears that people encounter when they want to approach a bulking phase, but they're not quite sure just yet? And how do
Yes.
you help them navigate them?
So I have kind of two that are the almost ubiquitous across everybody. So number one is I'm afraid that if I eat more, I'm going to rocket ship. Like if I had 100 calories, I'm going to gain 10 pounds a week, and that's going to be a problem. And then maybe I'm 10, but maybe go 5 pounds a week, and then it's like my life is over. And then fear number two is I'm going to go through this build phase, and I'm not going to be able to do a fat loss phase afterwards. And those two go a little bit hand in hand. So how we talk about fear number one. Fear number one is if I go into a build, I'm going to just rocket ship up and I will be a roly-poly in 5 weeks. That's just one of those things where you go, hey, look, we collect too much data for that to happen. And usually I will say, hey, look at what you've been eating the last few weeks. And we take a look and we look at, hey, here's your last 4 weeks of data, your last 8 weeks of data. And this person is eating, we'll call it 2,000 calories, plus or minus. Their range is 2,000, 2,100. And of course, there's always going to be a handful of like 2,200 calorie days in there, like maybe they had a girls' night or they went out to dinner. I'm like, cool. Our starting targets, like when we are going into a build phase, for the most part, we think about women, your target rate of gain is about, you're targeting about 0.5% to 1% of body weight gained per month. Okay, so what that looks like is about, if you're 150 pounds, that's 1.5 pounds, 1 to 1.5 pounds a month that you're gaining. That's nothing. So it's 1/4 to 0.4 pounds a week. I do not have that in kilograms, so, but imperial units. So when we take a look at that, it's only about 100 to 150 calories surplus. And so I might look at this and go, hey, Meg, you already have eaten 2,200 calories about 1 or 2 days a week for the last 4 weeks. All we're doing is eating that now for the next 2 weeks, and we're going to see what happens. Do you think if you ate it, 1 out of 7 days or 2 out of 7 days for the last month, that now eating that amount for 7 days a week is really going to make that happen? And 99% I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Like I didn't even have a scale blip the day after I ate that. Like probably not much is going to happen. And so I usually just say, hey, we collect far too much data to let anything go off the rails. And if it does go off the rails, we have enough data to make a decision to pull back. And so kind of step number one is if you're going to go into a build, using data to help guide you to get there is going to help you. Like I would not recommend that you go into a build and like, okay, I'm just going to YOLO eat. I'm not going to track my weight and I'm just going to do it based on how I feel. Like our feelings, especially as females with a menstrual cycle, do not help us. There are twice a month where you're like, I hate everything and I want to stab somebody. And you're like, is that feeling on those 2 days a month really going to help serve you in a build? No, I get especially if you are having a menstrual cycle, there are a couple clients I've had. I'm like, hey, we need to change our check-in date because without fail, you get me on your murderous day of the month, twice a month. We need to move this. Like you always feel terrible about yourself every 14 days. And let's just move this check-in 3 days forward in time when you're feeling great about yourself, and then you're going to feel a lot better about your nutrition journey. So if we were to only rely on our feelings when we go into a build, it's not going to go well. So part one is track the data. Even if you're like, I don't like looking at the scale, get a Bluetooth scale that you can literally put a piece of tape over the display You step on it, it syncs to your phone. You can look at it at the end of the week and be like, okay, what's my trend look like? So step one, you track too much data to let it go off the rails. You cannot go off the rails if you are tracking your data. This also means that I do want you to track your weekends. I want you to track your nights out. Even if you're 70% accurate, that's still going to give us a much better picture than if you have 2 untracked days a week. And then part 2 is like, okay, now that I've done the thing, will I be able to do fat loss phase afterwards? Generally speaking, what can we do in a caloric positive environment, a hypocaloric environment, that's really hard to do in a fat loss phase? So when we're in a surplus, again, we're only talking about 100, 150 more calories a day. Like, that's not much at all. When we're in a surplus, it is so much easier to hit our protein targets. It's so much easier to build out your meals because you have so many more calories to play with. So at the end of the surplus, hitting your protein target should be a breeze. Having your meal structure should also be a breeze. And so when we look at that fat loss phase, at the end of it, it's like, okay, well, hey, Meg, you're already hitting 150 grams of protein. All we need to do at this point to go into your fat loss phase is just pare back on some of those carbs and fats. And the approach into that fat loss phase after a surplus is far easier. And as we just kind of chatted about for the last, like the first 20 minutes, is when you have done a surplus or found that maintenance plus, your body's been in a very safe space for that amount of time because you haven't been constantly chasing fat loss. I can say outside of the perimenopause window and or hormone replacement therapy specifically in that like perimenopause state, I have had 0 clients not be able to do a fat loss phase after a build. And I specifically say the HRT in perimenopause because that's just like a whole nother hormone gamut that we approach, has a different approach than we do for anything else. So I just want to caveat asterisk this since we get to dive into the nuance here, that I want to make sure that we say that specifically.
That makes perfect sense, and thank you for the caveats as well. So, since you're clearly excellent at data collection and interpretation, my next question is, you've talked about a rate of gain that you target, 0.5 to 1% of body weight per month. Then I'm going to ask you a very open-ended question that you can take wherever you like, and it is, how do we set calories and macros? How do you set them to maximize muscle gain and minimize fat gain and hit this rate of gain? And also, why do you target this specific rate of gain?
So, okay, let's start with the rate of gain. So that 0.5 to 1% is specifically for intermediate trainees. The way that I would classify you as an intermediate trainee is if you have been consistently progressive overload training for 5 years or less, and you've never done a build before. There is a even less rate of gain for an advanced trainee and a higher rate of gain for a novice. However, I think it's okay, even if you're a novice trainee, to target that little less aggressive intermediate. Like that seems to be a sweet spot for everybody where you gain just enough during the build to make sure that you're making gains, but don't feel like you're just on a runaway train. So the novice trainee, I think, is actually closer either 1 to 1.5 or 1 to 2% body weight, which is a pretty significant, especially if you're a small female. That's just a lot. So we don't actually go for that. I'm like, I think we're okay to leave some gains on the table. So that's the rate of gain, 0.5% to 1. And we have research, especially by Jackson Pios, Alan Aragon. I can't remember who else is the co-signee on this one, but their model goes, if we are an intermediate trainee at that rate of gain, at least 0.5%, half of that, so the p-value of like how much of that weight you're gaining is muscle, is usually 50 to 75%. So for every pound of tissue you gain, at least a 0.5 pound of that is muscle, up to like 3/4 pound, which is great. And then we also already caveated earlier that some people experience outsized recomp where they gain 5 pounds and somehow gain 8 pounds of muscle and lost 3 pounds of body fat. So that's why we target that specific rate of gain, because we have good research that says, hey, this is why this rate of gain works for men, women, across the board. Oh, shoot, I forgot. Okay, 0.5%. Oh, and then calories and macros. How do we set those? Okay, so we back into, at this point, well, 0.5% rate of gain, or that 0.2 to 0.4, is roughly 100 to 150 calorie surplus, using the proxy that 3,500 calories equals a pound of tissue gain. Granted, we also know from the research that it's really 2,800 to 4,200 calories to gain a pound of tissue, or maybe even more than that. Some of them say 5,600. But 3,500 is a good proxy to get there. So our goal is to increase calories so that we get into that rate of gain. So if you take 3,500 times, that rate of gain, it gets you to 100, 150 calories a week. And we go, okay, well, what have you eaten the last 4 weeks on average? Especially ladies, we go through the menstrual cycle, and you have high water weeks around ovulation and high water weeks around your cycle. So we really want to look at 4 weeks of data to, an entire menstrual cycle to make sure that we are fully grasping the picture. If we're only looking at 2 weeks of data and we happen to hit like high water mark for period and the high water mark for ovulation, you might think your trend line for your weight's higher. So we go the last 4 weeks of data, and we go, okay, we've averaged 2,000 calories, and we look at the last 4 weeks of weigh-ins and see what our trend line is. So if our trend line is 0.0, so we're basically flat at maintenance, we go, okay, cool. We averaged 2,000 calories, our trend line is flat. Our target rate of gain right now, we're going to adjust calories to 2,100 to 2,150 and see what happens. If we start gaining at the rate of gain we want, great, we don't make a change. If 2 or 3 weeks in, nothing has happened because maybe we weren't actually at that top end of maintenance, then we go, okay, well, nothing's happened. We'll add another 100 to 150 calories until we get into that rate of gain. So that proxy is how we used to set it. And then we just make adjustments from there every 2 to 4 weeks until you're at the rate of gain you want to be at. And then your second follow-up question is like, well, how do I divide up that 2,100 calories? Well, kind of step one is I like to do flexible tracking. I don't think you need to hit protein, fats, carbs to the gram or plus or minus 5 grams. It's way too precise to live life. And again, we're in a surplus right now. You probably spent your last decade chasing tiny, tiny macros. Like, you need a little bit of freedom in your life. And I think we can do that in a surplus. So we go step one, how do we hit our protein targets? For most females, we go, okay, can we get close to 1 gram per pound body weight at that number? Or again, for that larger or heavier weight population, I'm usually looking at 150 to 160 max. I'm not usually asking anybody to eat more than that. So for example, I'm 145 pounds. My protein minimum is 140. I can just round down. Like, don't try to get exactly 1 gram per pound body weight. My goal is just be over 140 every day, a surplus. And then we go, okay, well, we have a bunch of calories remaining for fats and carbs. So we go, fats should be above 60 for optimal hormonal health. So I'm like, somewhere between 60 and 100. Like, I don't care where they are. You're going to find a sweet spot that works for you. You might eat 100 grams of fat in a day and be like, ooh, my digestion is a train wreck. So you might want to go 60 to 90. And then everything else goes carbs at that point. So giving yourself a little bit more flexibility, especially to live life. Like, I don't want you to come to me in a surplus being like, oh, Laura, we had date night on Friday, and I know I really need to get most of my calories from carbs after protein, but we went out to dinner and we went to this amazing steakhouse, but I didn't have that many rooms for fats, so I ordered chicken. If you order chicken at a steakhouse at your date night on Friday night because you're worried about your fats going over, I have failed you as a coach. So I don't care what you do with your fats, like 60 to 100, 60 to 90, somewhere in there. Order the ribeye, enjoy your date night. Try again tomorrow. So that's kind of my philosophy when it comes to like setting those targets, because again, we have to like match that. Yes, we have these bulking targets, but we also deliver life too. None of us are looking to step on stage right now. So if we're slightly out of optimal fats and carbs, but living our life well, then I think we're doing something right.
That resonates with me completely. I'm not a 3 macros plus calorie target type of coach. I think that would drive anyone insane. It would drive me insane. So I don't believe in that, and I appreciate that you seem to share the same perspective. What I'm wondering is, okay, we know how to set our calories and macros now. What would you advise a typical day to potentially look like, especially a training day? Because from my perspective, we want to feed training, or at least support training performance and enhance training performance with the extra calories to be able to maximize the results of training. How would you do that? How would you structure your eating to accomplish that goal?
Totally. So again, lifestyle matching goals here. I would recommend that you take that, again, back to our 2,100 calorie meal. I would recommend that you divide that into 3 meals plus 1 snack around your training. Okay. So let's go with that becomes 3 600 calorie meals plus a 300 calorie snack, peri-workout. You can plus or minus there. So we go, assuming your training session, let's call it we'll walk through a handful of them, but I don't want anybody going into a workout fasted. So whether that is walking into the gym, if your training sessions are 6 o'clock in the morning, cool. Drink, drink something before you walk in. You can tell me that you don't want to eat anything going in. That's fine. My favorite go-to is orange juice plus a little vanilla protein. Shake it up. You've got like 150 calories in. You got 30 to 50, 40 grams of carbs. Drink it down. Go hit your workout. Eat breakfast afterwards. I always recommend that we have something. When we have all these extra calories to spare, putting that snack slash intra-workout slash whatever you want to call it near your training session is just helping you get that like kind of last 10%. There's no need to have a big gap of food from the end of your training session to your next meal. So when we have all these extra calories to spare, go ahead and dedicate it to one of those like intra or workout training. If you work out after work, so maybe you have lunch at noon, you work out at 5, and then you get home and you eat immediately dinner, you might need that to actually be a pre-workout to go in. So that might look like, oh, I'm having some rice cakes and dates, just something to kind of get the blood flow going and get a little more carbs in your system before you go hit that training session. And then you go home and eat a good high protein dinner. Boom. So when you have all those calories to spend around your workout first. Like no need to leave that 10% on the table. But the number one actually issue that comes up is the rest days. So we want to be eating the same amount of bulking targets on our rest days. And from a female client perspective, they're usually like, uh-oh, I'm not training today. I have a hard time getting these calories in on my non-training day. Where do I put this 300 calorie intra-workout? I'm like, great, eat some chocolate. But staying ahead of the game of going, how do I plan my food enough on my rest days and my training days that I don't have those low days, and also that I don't have to eat a 1,000 calorie dinner. Because that is the biggest, like if you had your 600 calorie breakfast, your 600 calorie lunch, you didn't train, so you don't have your intro workout, you have now a 1,000 calorie dinner you have to eat. That is not a fun place to be if you want to sleep well and recover. Because if you're sitting there lying in bed after eating like 60 grams of protein and 100 grams of carbs, you're not going to feel very good. You can be like having the meat sweats. It's not a fun place to be. So that's usually cool. You get to have whatever snack you want. Have a snack at 3 p.m. Have an extra latte. Like do what you want to do, but we have to get those calories in, and you're going to feel better if you do it earlier in the day, around when you're being the most active, whether that's brain active or movement active, but get those calories in, keep a kind of structure for yourself so that your training days and your rest days are similar. And you're hitting your calorie goal, you're hitting a protein goal, and you're also able to sleep well afterwards.
There's another reason why I encourage that with my clients as well, which is that a question I've been asked before is, if I'm not training, why do I need to be in a surplus? And this typically comes from the type of person who is a little bit afraid of eating more and gaining weight, and they try to justify eating by saying, well, I'm exercising, so I should eat. Whereas if they're not exercising, they don't necessarily feel like eating is worth it or warranted. And I'm wondering how you would respond to that, Laura.
Totally. So, okay, actually, I have my first metric example for you. So if we are in this 0.2 to 0.4 pound rate of gain per week, let's theoretically say we're doing 4 workouts a week. Your capacity to build muscle might be 25 grams of muscle per workout. Okay, guys, I'm going to tell you this example is hypothetical. We know that the muscle protein synthesis response lasts for up to 48 hours per training session. So what does that mean? That means that you have the capacity to build 25 grams of muscle per training session, but that might be 15 grams on the first day, 7 grams on the second day, 3 grams on the third day, because it's spread out over that 48-hour time period. Well, if you only eat up on your training session days, you might be leaving 10 of those 25 grams of gains on the table. So now you just spent 12 weeks in a surplus, but you only ate on surplus on your training days. You left, so again, 10 out of 25 is 40%. You left 40% of your gains on the table because you didn't eat enough to recover from your workouts. Like, do you really want to go through this entire process and then leave 40% of your gains on the table? Probably not. So that's where we go, hey, like we're only eating a little bit of surplus. And also, because that's kind of the numerical example. But option 2 is like, this isn't a vacuum. What are you doing that hour and a half when you're not in a gym? You're probably cleaning the house. You're doing laundry. You've got other things you're doing. You're not laying on your bed rotting the 2 or 3 rest days. Like you're probably just moving your body in other ways. And I think that's another preconceived notion, especially we're like, oh, well, like if I'm not at the gym, there's no other activity than when I'm at the gym. Like you're telling me that going around vacuuming your house, getting 5,000 steps vacuuming and cleaning doesn't count. Like it might not be gains loading, but you're certainly burning calories moving around, like wiping down all the tables and everything. And so that's where I think that sometimes comes up too. It's like life isn't a vacuum. You are filling that extra hour. And if you are a person who's open to being in a build, you're probably a person who's also maybe a little bit more type A. Maybe you've got a lot of other things on fire. You do not let any moment go to rest. And I guarantee you that you are doing something else in that 90 minutes on your rest days that you weren't doing on your lift days.
And from a data person to another, Laura, I'm sure you'll get this point I'm about to make. But technically, if we're trying to target a rate of gain per month, then you need to eat roughly on average your surplus calories to be able to achieve that rate, because we didn't calculate those calories out of nowhere. We calculated them to target that specific rate of gain. Now, if let's say you train 4 days per week and 3 days you're at maintenance instead, well, that's 3 times 4, that's 12 days in a month where you're not going to target those calories. So your average calories for the month are below where we want to be. So now we're not going to see the rate of gain that we want.
Exactly. So, and then we go, and if we are seeing the rate of gain that we want, then we're probably eating in too much of a surplus because we're having way too many calories on our training days and not enough on our rest days. And so, agreed. We intentionally, when we walk back to that 150 calorie surplus, that's assuming you spread out evenly over 7 days, not unevenly. So, yes, exactly.
And this approach also has the beneficial effect, in my view, of helping that kind of person overcome the urge to undereat because they're not exercising enough, in their view. It helps detach from the mindset that, oh, food is only warranted if I've earned it. You don't need to earn your food.
Exactly. And then we think about the practical applications. Like, what if you're a person who is your late afternoon training or like right after work? Well, what if something comes up? Are you going to penalize yourself because you already ate your pre workout and then you didn't go to the gym and now you're not like that mentality of going, hey, we have calories for certain days a week and calories not for other days a week, that I think causes some massive psychological harm because then they're like, oh, I have to maybe I ended up going for a run when I got home because I already ate my pre-workout calories. So I have to do something, even though that's actually not beneficial to the surplus. So this is why I'm really not a big fan of calorie or carb cycling when it comes to maintenance or surplus or even a deficit, because having multiple targets for different days a week, but what if the reason why you have that target doesn't happen? If you have offset days, you're going to have that freak out of going, okay, I had all these extra calories, but I didn't do my workout versus oh, I didn't train today, I'll do it tomorrow. Like much easier when you just go, okay, here's my targets, 7 days a week, no big deal. It doesn't matter when I train. It matters that I train and get it done.
I agree. I was actually going to ask you about your approach to calorie cycling because I used to be more liberal about it in the past, but now I advise my clients to keep it for the odd social event in a fat loss phase where it doesn't make sense to stay in your deficit, and maybe saving a couple hundred calories a few days in advance would make sense. And even then, I am much more strict with how much people save, in that before I kind of left it to the clients. Now I say, hey, don't save more than these many calories per day, no more than 10, maybe 15% max, depending on your calorie budget, because we don't want to end up ravenous leading up to this event. And then you turn it into a little YOLO fest because you've been looking forward to it to the whole week, and you've been depriving yourself all days leading up to it. So it sounds like we're on the same page about that.
100%. I really just don't ever implement it. The only kind of calorie cycling that we implement, which isn't even cycling, it's to be honest, is if you have performance goals. So if you are hiking, you're running, you're doing some sort of long endurance event, you have your maintenance calories, and then on the days you have training sessions, you eat more calories. There's never a low day. It's just you have your maintenance days and then you have higher days to match your activity level. And so in a build, same. And in a deficit, same. I probably don't do as much even holding calories for the next day in a deficit. My more philosophy is that we pick before you go into the deficit. We go, hey, we have 3 maintenance days where life is more important than our aesthetic goals. So, for example, my deficit always falls on my husband's birthday and my best friend's birthday because they're March and April. And then I usually have something else like a wedding or something. And I'm like, okay, well, those 3 days, I'm not going to tell my husband that we need to go to a macro friendly restaurant for his birthday. Like that's a no-go. So when I have his birthday coming up, I go, okay, hey, Matt's birthday's gonna be here. That's a day that's gonna be maintenance. And if I have those 3 days planned for that 12-week fat loss phase, then it's a lot easier to go, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go out to that girls' night, but I'm gonna still stick to my targets. I'm gonna turn down the glass of wine because I know Matt's birthday coming up and I don't want to sacrifice Matt's birthday because I want to go to a girls' night with a few glasses of wine. I'm still gonna go, but I'm gonna be like, hey, I'll grab some Pellegrino or fizzy water. So a couple different like approaches there, but I think they all sort of work depending on what your goals are and your time frame.
Yeah, more tools in the toolbox. And I use your approach as well. I don't necessarily keep a client in a deficit if they have a social event. I discuss it depending on the situation, the calorie budget they have, and the psychology. Overall, it seems like we share the same values and perspective on the importance or even the pros and cons, so to speak, of calorie cycling. Now, since we've talked about nutrition in quite a bit of depth, I want to also discuss training because ultimately, to me, that is the biggest priority in a muscle building phase. Everybody always talks about nutrition first because we're thinking about gaining weight, but ultimately, the surplus enables muscle, well, helps with muscle growth. What actually makes it happen is the training. And I was wondering, Laura, what are the most common training mistakes that you see your clients make that you really want to help them with to make sure that they get the most out of their training, meaning the greatest amount of gains?
So I'm going to preface this with I'm assuming that you're following a progressive overload hypertrophy based program. And that program has you hitting body parts twice a week. So the frequency is there and you're following a progressive overload program. So if we have those two things in place, or one thing, the program is in place, the biggest issue I see is one, you don't know how to approach reps from failure, or you try to fail every single workout. It's a little bit of a spectrum. So when we think about reps from failure, we think about, hey, how hard are you training? And is that progressive overload program giving you runway to increase your load or reps over time? So you either go one of two ways. One, you're like, ooh, it's starting to burn. I think I'm really close to failure. I'm going to stop the workout. And you're leaving significant gains on the table because you're afraid to fail. On the other spectrum, there's the, oh, I'm in a build, therefore I have to get the most out of this workout. It might say 3 reps from failure and I'm going to take it to the house every single set. And then they burn out in 3 weeks and go, oh, Laura, my traps are hurting, my shoulders pain, like I can barely walk. And I'm like, what are you doing in a workout? They go, oh, well, I just didn't want to leave any gains on the table. So I went every set to failure and I added a few sets. And I'm like, okay, well, that's an approach, not an approach I'd recommend. So when you think about the telling somebody to back off from reps and failure is a little bit easier than explaining to a person how to push to failure. So let's talk about the person who needs to push a little bit harder. I will strategically talk to them. And this is one of, when we think about a checklist going into a build phase, I think we chatted about this way back in the beginning, but like 1, you're hitting protein, 2, you're following a progressive overload program, and 3, you understand what failure looks like. Well, sometimes a client will chat with you, and because we're online, they might go, yeah, I know what reps from failure is. And then they send you a client video and you're like, I don't think you do. So the things that I will do and press and be like, hey, I want you to fail on a movement that is relatively non-injury risk. Like you cannot hurt yourself going to failure on this movement. So that might look like a lateral raise and a hamstring curl. Like go set up your camera and I want you to go until you can go no mo with technical failure. So what that might look like a hamstring curl, I'm like, okay, so film yourself. And then we watch those last 3 to 4 reps and your leg is swinging and eventually go, okay, that 3rd rep from failure, you start to slow down. That 2nd rep from failure, even slower. That last rep right before failure, you're barely moving the leg pad and then you just can't get it up the final rep. I'm like, now remember that feeling. I don't care where you are in a training program, I have you do at least 1 set. Now I want you to emulate those 2 last slow reps on every single set. So now that you know what that feels like and you've got a benchmark, maybe you did 15 reps on the leg curl when you thought like 10 was really close to failure. Now you have your benchmark. for the rest of the training program to know what that feels like. And if you know what that feels like on some movements, it's a lot easier to, okay, on like a hack squat, to get a little bit closer because you understand what that's supposed to feel like. So that's the part where once people break through that mindset on the training of like, what does failure look like? How do I approach it? How do I implement it? They tend to have their gains like take off like a rocket ship. So like, oh, I know how to push myself now. And especially if you're following a program where your movements tend to repeat for like at least 2 cycles. So at least you get to the end of your first cycle, like, ooh, okay, I knew I was sandbagging. Now I can repeat that movement again and better implement rep and load selection. Then that next 6 weeks, you're like, oh, okay, I'm making progress every single week with these extra calories because I understand where that failure point is.
That makes perfect sense. And then how do you help with somebody who needs to back off from failing every single workout?
So the conversation I'll have with them is like, hey, I hear that you're afraid to not make gains because you're not pushing yourself hard enough in the workout. But hypertrophy is the game of over recovery. It is the game where you need to come back bigger every single week. If you empty your cup every single workout, you have nothing left to recover from. You are just making it to each workout. And usually we can then pull up their training logs and be like, all right, well, you've been going to failure for 3 weeks. Have you made any progress on these movements? And usually it starts to flatline 3 or 4 weeks of going everything to the house. I'm like, cool. You could have made so much more progress if you just left a little bit in the tank. That's why progressive overload programs are set up on these 6 or 8 or 12-week cycles where you can gradually work up to that because you leave a little bit in the tank. And then as you get close to that max out week, then you empty the tank and then you back off and you do it again. But we pull up the training logs and we go, hey, you're probably not progressing on a number of these movements. We talk through the analogy of like, you have to have something in your cup. If your cup is completely empty every single day, you have nothing to recover from. And so therefore we're actually leaving gains on the table because you're spending all your resources just trying to overcome the stress you put on your body that day, versus if we had left a little bit in the tank, you're actually able to overcome and build. But you have nothing left to build from because you have just overcome. And so when we talk about that piece, that usually kind of rings a bell or rings parallel. I'm like, do it my way for 6 weeks, see what happens. And then they go, oh yeah, I heard a little bit less. Everything's moving a little bit better. I'm making progress. Sweet, our work is done.
That's excellent. I really like that approach. And again, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I'm really glad that I had you on the podcast today. I think we covered a lot of grounds. And on that note, I want to give you the opportunity to tell everyone how they can connect with you and work with you if they choose to.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Laura Justine Savino or at Elevated Pursuit Nutrition. And of course, if this resonated with you, would love to work with you. If not, you have obviously an excellent host here that you can work with as well.
Well, thank you very much. And indeed, you will find the links to both my ways to contact me and ways to contact Laura in the show notes for this episode. And dear listeners, as always, it's such a privilege that you choose to listen to me for at least some time when I release a podcast. And Laura, it was such a great experience to talk to you a little bit more and get to know you a little bit more in person. Is there anything at all that you'd like to leave the audience with before we sign off today?
Just don't be scared to start. What is the worst that could happen if you tried to increase your calories and build a little bit of muscle? That's the question I ask every single time. What is the worst that could happen? If you make peace with the worst that could happen, it's not so hard to get started.
And thank you for tying that bow. And dear listeners, thanks again for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.